Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today, and welcome to the NSCA Foundation webinar series and today's webinar on promoting mental well-being. So I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Rachel Bowes. Rachel Bowes is the Head of Crisis Services and Quality at Lifeline Australia. She has clinical responsibility for all Lifeline services, including the development and delivery of the Crisis Support Service, which currently receives around 1 million contacts per year from Australians in crisis or at risk of suicide. Rachel has professional and postgraduate qualifications in mental health nursing and counselling and has spent over 20 years working in public, private and not-for-profit mental health services in the UK and Australia. Rachel has worked in and managed acute community and inpatient mental health services across both urban and rural communities. Prior to joining Lifeline in early 2018, Rachel spent several years delivering and managing services providing digital mental health, counselling and human services, and understands the unique challenges of providing mental health care through non-face-to-face channels. Please welcome Rachel Bowes.
Thanks so much for the introduction there. I'm really happy to be here and talking to you all today about promoting mental well-being and mental health. As you can tell from my bio, it's something that I feel pretty strongly about and have a lot of interest and experience in. So I'm looking forward to getting started. So I've been at Lifeline now for just over 2 years, and I guess one of the things that I've learned here is that we work with people who don't really have much contact with mental health services, and I think that's true for most of us. We deal with the problems and adversities of life through informal support and with friends and family and through workplace supports. And so I really want to talk about some of that today, about how we look after ourselves and promote mental well-being in a way that doesn't always involve going to services, to mental health services. So I've put this on here, you're not always fine. And how often do we say, I'm fine, thanks, in response to being asked, how are you? It's an automatic and it's a polite response, and we rarely ask ourselves at that moment, is it true? Now, there are lots of valid reasons why we would say, I'm fine, when we're not least because in many situations the audience or the circumstances mean it would be uncomfortable or even inappropriate to say, well, actually, things are terrible. But we're not always fine, and that's okay. And in this session, we're going to look at some of the ways in which we can turn the dial so that when we say, I'm fine, we actually mean it more often than we don't. So I'm hoping by the end of this session, what we will do is that we'll all have an understanding of what we mean by mental well-being and mental health. We'll consider some of the ways that we can improve our own mental health and well-being. You'll learn how you can develop and build mental resilience to help yourself through tough periods. And we'll finish off by understanding the importance of self-care, what it is, and how having a self-care plan can help you manage your own mental health. So the World Health Organization provides this definition of mental health: a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So being mentally well isn't just the absence of mental health problems, of stress or excessive worry, but it's actually a positive mindset and a way of being that enables us all to reach our full potential. Now, without thinking too hard, on a scale of 1 to 10, if we say that 10 is the ideal state, which is being described here by the World Health Organization, where would you put your own mental well-being today? We're not going to share this with anyone or do anything with it, but it's really good to take a bit of a temperature check to have our own baseline of where we think we sit on this scale of well-being, because maybe over the next month what you can do is challenge yourself to implement some of the things that we're going to talk about today to see if you can improve your own mental well-being rating. And I should say that getting to a 10 on that scale would be pretty unusual. And if I'm honest, for myself, most days I'm hovering at around a 6 or a 7 on that scale. So some days it's higher, but the reality is, for me personally, there's always a bit of work to do. As well as the definition that we just looked at from the World Health Organization, another way of thinking about mental health is as a continuum. Now, I'm sorry, this is a bit of a busy slide. There are lots of versions of this that you can find on the internet. And this idea of a continuum is a really good way to help you understand if your own emotional and mental state, or that of someone that you know, is at a point where you should be concerned and seeking help. And you'll see that the language used here really refers to symptoms and behaviours and impact rather than diagnoses or labels. And it's much more helpful when trying to think about mental health in the context of our own life and our day-to-day behaviours and experiences. The bottom of this continuum also suggests what kind of support and interventions might be helpful depending on where you sit on this continuum. And again, that can be really helpful when you're thinking about, is this normal? Is it something I should be dealing with on my own? Or actually, is it time to perhaps go and visit my GP? So using this idea of a continuum and some of the symptoms on there can be really helpful in thinking about that decision making. And again, it's worth just looking at this and reflecting, where am I right now? And I guess a lot of us will probably fall somewhere between healthy and reacting. We might have some symptoms of both those things. Okay, so what is wellness? We've talked a little bit about the various states of mental health, but the concept of wellness is really suggesting that we don't wait for things to go wrong, but instead we should proactively look after ourselves physically, emotionally, so how we feel, and psychologically, how we think, to strengthen us in time for times of adversity or illness. So this idea of wellness accepts that there will be stresses and illness at some point in our life. That is normal human experience. But if we spend time focusing on establishing everyday habits, rather than waiting for illness or problems to arise before we take any action, can actually help us create a positive attitude. And these preventative measures, they're not designed to prevent illness or adversity, but really what they do is allow us to develop some skills and resilience so that when things do go wrong, we perhaps will spend less time, money, distress or energy on trying to resolve those issues. So it's really around developing a positive wellness mindset. So the principles of wellness, there are lots of ways that we can influence this ourselves. And as much as I would like to have a magic wand and say, have this thing, it will fix you, the reality is that most of these things are within our control. So we all know that eating healthily is important, but actually our diet can really affect our mental health. Poor nutrition impacts our concentration, our thinking, and can sometimes worsen the symptoms of depression. Being active, again, we know that it's important, but in terms of our mental health, it's really important because regular activity maintains our physical health and reduces the risk of diseases, but it also has immediate and longer term mental health benefits. Not only does being active promote better sleep, but it can also reduce our reactions to stress and anxiety and allow us to challenge more easily some of our negative thinking. Sleeping enough, most of us will probably have on our list of things that we could pay more effort to would be sleeping better. Most of us underestimate the value of good and adequate sleep, and it's actually essential to maintain health and well-being. So if we're not sleeping well, we will tend to concentrate more poorly, more likely to have mood swings, be more prone to physical illnesses, generally lower productivity in our lives. The role of sleep is to allow us to grow and heal, restore our energy and prepare body for the demands of the next day. So if we're not sleeping continually very well, then that is going to impact us in quite a negative way. Avoiding toxins and poisons. Now, this is not anything too tricky. It's actually toxins and poisons in the form of alcohol and other drugs. And I think for most of us, it's quite normal to reach for a glass of wine at the end of the day as a way of managing our stress, or some people quite often will take recreational drugs on the weekend to help them relax or have fun. And we think that that is us relaxing and helping cope with our problems. Perhaps it's a way of escaping or dulling some of the emotional, physical pain that we're experiencing. But really the links between physical and mental well-being, mental illness, drugs and alcohol dependency and our brain chemistry are really complex, but all the research shows that there are huge levels of interconnectivity there. Drug and alcohol can really trigger mental health problems, or they can make them worse in people who are currently experiencing them. And long-term excessive use can certainly change the way that people live, act and look. So I'm the last person to sit here and say you should never have a drink, but I think it's around checking in with yourself around and having some sense of perspective and thinking about how and why you might be using alcohol or drug and what the role of it is in your life. Managing stress. Again, most people think that they are not very good at managing stress. And I think that that's often because most of us assume that stress is not a normal thing, when actually stress is a very normal reaction to the competing demands and pressures of life. And it's the experience of stress can be thought of really as a mental or an emotional strain. But it doesn't have to be problematic, and it doesn't have to take over. And when stress takes over is when it has become an abnormal reaction. And it's important to recognize what your current patterns of thinking, believing, feeling and behaving are, because those links between what you think, what you feel and how you behave really dictate your own personal response to stress. So when we think about wellness, it's really around accepting that stress is inevitable because it is part of everyone's life, but really to focus on the opportunities that having a period of stress gives us to build our resilience and our personal stress management techniques. So we're never going to avoid stress, but what we can do is learn how to predict it and manage it more successfully, so the impact of stress on us is much less problematic. And we're going to talk about resilience a bit more later. And lastly, cultivating loving and supporting relationships. Now, this is in here because as human beings, we are social creatures and we need connection, genuine connection and healthy relationships around us to help us thrive. And this idea of wellness really encourages us to learn to appreciate and value the positive relationships in our lives, and also think perhaps about some of the relationships that we have in our lives that are not good for us, that don't make us feel good, that don't promote a sense of well-being or safety. And this idea of wellness really is a connection of all of these different parts of our lives. And I guess one of my challenges to you is to think, which of these are you good at, and where do you have a sense that perhaps you're not looking after yourself so well, or where there's opportunity to do more? Because the more you can shift the dial across these principles of wellness, the more likely you are to feel well and to stay well mentally and physically. So resilience is the ability to be knocked down by the adversities of life and to come back at least as strong as before. I've popped this quote up here that I like. It's because I think it reflects the reality of the situation. Life doesn't get easier and it doesn't become more forgiving, but actually what happens is that we can and do get stronger and more resilient, so we're able to deal with the challenges that life continues to throw at us. And resilience is a psychological tool that can help us adapt to changing circumstances, to find a way to change course, to emotionally heal ourselves, and to continue moving forward towards our goals. And there's been a lot of research around resilience, and one of the things that has been confirmed is that something we can learn. It's not something innate, we're not born with it. Some people might be naturally better at it or have a more resilient kind of personality, but we can all learn the skills of resilience and develop them within ourselves. And this is mainly done through focusing, but also through repetition. So the more we practice some of the skills of resilience, the better we get at it. And the more we practice, the more that our brain believes that we can do it. It believes that it's true that we are resilient. And this is called neuroplasticity. And it's the sense that our brain function and the structural changes based on repeated behaviours, emotions and thoughts that allow us to build bad habits, so addictive behaviour and repetitive habits that we continue to do even though we know they're not good for us. We can use those same neural pathways to develop positive habits and positive ways of behaving and positive thought processes. So our brain has that ability, but most of us are much better at using it to develop adverse habits rather than positive habits. And one of the ways that we can do that, circling back to the principles of wellness that we talked about on the last slide, is that the more we practice some of those habits with healthy behaviours and healthy habits, the more likely our brain is to eventually determine that that's the way things are, that's what we do, and it takes less effort to implement those healthy habits. So the research evidence clearly shows that the more positive emotions we experience, the more resilient we will become. So one of the things that we can think about is how to generate some of these more positive emotions by developing some skills and practice that enable us to do that. And at the end of the presentation, I've got a slide of resources, which we'll share with you after this, so you don't need to take notes here. There'll be some good tips and places where you can go to help you. So mindfulness, I guess most people have heard of mindfulness, but think it's either something tricky or sounds difficult. And there was some research done recently by Harvard University, and they used an app called Track Your Happiness that asked people 3 questions. What are you doing right now? Where is your mind right now? Is it focused on what you're doing, or is it focused elsewhere? And how happy or unhappy are you right now? And the study found that almost 50% of the time people were not paying attention to what they were doing right now. And the study also showed that people are significantly less happy when their minds are not focused on what they're currently engaged in. And people were significantly unhappier because their mind was wandering. So there's a real connection between being able to stay in the present moment and focus on what you're doing and how happy or content you feel with yourself at that moment. And mindfulness is the concept of being fully present and engaged at this moment in time, being aware of your thoughts and feelings without being distracted or having any judgment on them. Now, it's a skill that has to be learned and practiced, and I confess it's something that I actually find quite difficult personally. I have a bit of a monkey brain. It jumps around and it's very busy, and I actually find it very hard to be in the moment, to focus right on what I'm doing right now. But it's such a useful skill to develop resilience and a positive mindset that it's really worth persevering with. And there are some really good resources that I've included at the end of here that can help very much with the practice of meditation and developing habit of being mindful, either through meditation or through some specific mindfulness activities. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at those and have a try, because for those people who are very skilled at practicing mindfulness, they genuinely describe it as quite a life-changing skill to have. So I'd certainly encourage you to go and seek that out. So, outlook here. So one of the ways that we can cultivate a positive outlook is by focusing on enjoying small experiences. And we're not talking enjoying big moments, which are great, but the small things that happen on a day-to-day basis. It's about noticing them and enjoying them at the time that they happen. So unlike achieving competency in meditation or mindfulness, which can take quite a lot of time to develop, as I was just saying, the research suggests that when we practice taking a positive outlook, we can see changes on our brain circuitry within a matter of weeks. And it can be really small things like savouring a meal, enjoying something really lovely that you're eating right at that moment, looking around and noticing some beautiful flowers in your garden, enjoying the moment that you are having with some friends and family. And it's as simple as noticing that that's a good thing and making a comment to yourself that, you know, those flowers are really beautiful. I'm so lucky to have them right outside my window, or how nice it is to sit and have a coffee with this person. We only do this once a week and it's a really lovely opportunity to catch up. So it's about noticing at that moment that this is a good moment, a good thing, and making a comment to yourself. And to repeat this process as often as you can and in as many circumstances as you can will yield positive results, and you are building a practice of noticing the positive things in your life. Okay. So generosity and kindness. Now, these two things are really linked, and when we practice them, they strengthen our well-being and make us feel happier. And again, I think generosity and kindness are attributes that a lot of us think we either have or we don't have. We're either born with them or we're not. We're on one scale of the generosity spectrum or we're not. But actually, they are both things that we can actively choose to do more of or to do better. And the more we apply generosity and kindness in our lives, we will experience those positive emotions that will have a positive impact on our brain chemistry. And brain changes are more enduring than changes that take place when we respond to positive things. So if I give something good to somebody else, the positive impact on my brain is more than if I receive something good. So I will have more benefit from giving you something that you have really appreciated and valued than I will from winning a prize for myself. So that old adage about it's being better to give than to receive is true. It's a positive impact on ourselves. And there's a lovely article that I've linked at the end of this about why generosity is good for you. And it makes really interesting reading. So empathy, again, is a great skill for us all to practice. And being able to view others with compassion and empathy allows us to see the good in them. So empathy is the ability to emotionally understand what other people feel, to see things from their point of view, and to be able to imagine yourself in their place. It is putting yourself in someone else's position and feeling what you think they must be feeling. And empathizing with others really helps you to learn to regulate your own emotions. And emotional regulation is important because it allows you to manage what you're feeling, even at times of great stress, without becoming overwhelmed. So the practice of empathy and trying to actively put yourself in somebody else's shoes and to experience something as they are, again, can be it can be a very changing experience, not just from your outlook on other people and your view of the world, but it can have a positive impact on the way you view and manage your own emotions. And I've included a nice little video on one of the links that's only a couple of minutes long, but it's a part of that is a really funny but astute what's the difference between sympathy and empathy. It's definitely worth a look. And lastly, back to the this sense around cultivating relationships, and the reason why, again, this is a skill to be learned and practiced, is because social connection is so important to us. And when we have those relationships, it allows us to practice some of our other skills, like being kind and being generous and being empathic. And people who lack social connection are more vulnerable to not only physical health problems, but a whole range of mental health problems. And there's been a lot of studies again around the impact of connection and positive relationships. But what we have seen is that our lack of social connection is a bigger predictor of various kinds of physical health problems than other more traditional risk factors like smoking and high blood pressure and a lack of physical activity. So social connection is not measured by how many friends you have, but it's by your subjective feelings about the value of those connections and relationships. And some of us can have few or no close friends or family, but still feel a genuine connection to their community or their work or people that they interact with in other ways. And conversely, many people have vast, large social networks of friends and acquaintances, but actually really struggle to identify anyone in that extended group that they have more than a superficial connection with. So the concept of quality over quantity applies very well to our relationships. It's not about how many people we have in our circle, but actually what is the impact of those people on us. And people who feel more connected to others have greater levels of empathy and trust, and show in general lower levels of anxiety and depression. So when we have very busy lives, it can be really hard to cultivate and maintain those relationships that are important. And it's not possible to do that with 20 people, but it is possible to do that with one or two. So again, I really encourage you to take a moment to think about those relationships in your life and which are the ones that are worth cultivating and growing and nurturing. Okay. So one of the things I thought it would be useful to talk about briefly is what happens if we notice that we are not okay, or that someone we care about doesn't seem to be okay. And one of the things that we talk about a lot at Lifeline is this recognise, respond, refer framework, and we can apply this as much to other people as we can to ourselves. And so the first step is about recognising. So it's about noticing a change in demeanour or habits or behaviours, and this can be in yourself or someone else. It's about noticing the indicators or hearing the signs that you or someone you care about is struggling. So we think here about personal habits like changes in sleep patterns, changing in eating habits, more significant variations in mood, perhaps being a bit more tearful, poor concentration, or impacts on your personal relationships. So you can use this a bit like a personal check-in. Am I sleeping as well as I usually do? Am I finding it a bit harder to concentrate or focus than usual? Am I less or more irritable with the people around me? Am I withdrawing a bit? Am I less social than I have been? And you can also apply it to people that you know and care about. So there may be people in your circle that you notice just some subtle changes in their behaviour, or perhaps some of the things that they say to you may have triggered a bit of a concern. So this idea of taking a moment to actually recognise when there's been a change, and it's usually an adverse change. Then the next step is to respond. So it's about letting the other person know that you can see that things are not okay to them, or acknowledging to yourself that things are not going well in your own life and making the decision to take some action. So if this is with someone else that you know or care about, could be someone in your social circle, and your friends or family, or a peer or a colleague at work, you might say something like, I've noticed you haven't seen yourself recently. Would you like to talk about it? Would you like to go and get a coffee? Would it help to run it past me? It doesn't really matter what you say. The idea is that you are letting that person know that you have noticed that things are not great for them, and that you're making yourself available if they need someone. And they may say no, and that's okay. They might just not be ready. But it's around responding to the things that you have noticed. It's about acknowledging to that person or to yourself, okay, things are not right. It's time to perhaps take the next step and do something about it. So the last step of this little framework is we call it refer, but it's really around identifying next steps. And this isn't about you referring someone to a psychologist, but it's more around for yourself saying, okay, I've noticed things are not going so well. It's really time to do something about it. What kind of person is going to help me? Do I need to talk to someone, or am I actually looking for information? Is this a problem about something specific, like a dependency on alcohol? Are there some services that I can use there? Or is it something more generic? I've just noticed that I'm feeling a bit more down. I've been a bit more tearful. Where's the best place for me to go? And again, with someone else, it's around having a similar kind of conversation. Who do you think might be a good person for you to talk to? Would you feel more comfortable talking to someone you know or a stranger? Often a GP, in either way, is the best first step. So it's about not just letting something go, but it's around thinking about, okay, I've decided that I need help, or you've decided that you need some help. Let's think about where the best place to go to get that is. Because I think sometimes one of the things that we all worry about, particularly if we're reaching out to offer support to somebody else, is that we can feel burdened by their problems, or feel like we need to find a solution or fix those problems for people. And this idea of referring is relieving you of that perceived obligation to fix something for someone. So you can say, I've noticed things are not great. We've had a talk about what's happening for you. Now I'm going to help you think about where you can get the help that you need, and encouraging that person to do that, so you're not sat with their worries or feeling like you have to fix them. Okay. So on the last slide, we talked about a framework for managing times when things are not going so well, either for yourself or for somebody else. But what are some of the things that we can do right now to give ourselves the best chance of being mentally healthy? We can take some proactive steps to reduce our risk of mental health problems, or simply prepare ourselves to manage ill health if it occurs. So there's a list of components here, like eating well, being active, sleeping well, managing stress, connecting with other people, learning your triggers and vulnerabilities, identifying support networks and resources, and that can be in your home life and at work, and building your own self-awareness and understanding of your own mental well-being. And we've talked about most of these at various points, and there's certainly all the personal habits that we can address. But if we just look at those last three things on that list, so learning your triggers and vulnerabilities, I think on some level, most of us understand what are some of the things that we find harder to deal with than others, certain times or points in our lives when we might be more vulnerable to having difficulty managing our emotions, or it might be certain people who push our buttons the wrong way, or certain a set of circumstances. We might look around and think that actually when we have that moment at 6 o'clock in the evening when the kids are all at home and no one's done their homework and I'm trying to make the dinner and the house is a mess, and that's the point where I really lose it quite often. That is you recognizing a vulnerability or a trigger. And the next step is about saying, okay, so that happens at least 3 times a week and I spend the next hour feeling furious. What are some of the things that we can start to do differently, some subtle changes to stop that series of events occurring with as much frequency? Or if I can't change the series of events happening, what can I do to either remove myself or to deal with it more positively? So I encourage all of you to think about what are some of the triggers in your life, some of the situations that are a bit of a red flag or always leave you just feeling upset or cross or angry. It might be people who are your triggers. Quite often it is, and quite often it's our family who are our triggers. We know that we're going to our in-laws at the weekend and you always end up reacting really badly to some of the sly digs that someone on the other side of the family inevitably makes. That's a trigger. It's a vulnerable set of circumstances for you. So what are some of the things that you can do to prepare yourself to deal with that set of circumstances? So we all have these triggers and vulnerabilities at work and at home, in our social networks. So start to have a think about some of the things that might be yours and what you can perhaps do to alleviate or minimize some of the results of those triggers and vulnerabilities. Identifying support networks and resources. And this is as much about thinking about who are the people in your life that you can rely on to go to for support or advice or a shoulder to cry on, but it's also about being thoughtful, particularly in your workplace. Well, what are some of the things that my workplace has in place to help me when things get tough? So how approachable are the HR department? Is there an EAP service that I can make use of? Is it confidential? Is it free? What needs to have happened for me to be able to use that? Is there any training that's available through work that can help me build resilience or build some skills or manage my workload or my team more positively? And the last item on this list, building self-awareness and understanding of your own mental well-being, is really a combination of a lot of the things that we've touched on today. So looking back to some of those early slides around the World Health Organization definition and that mental health continuum, and just starting to develop a bit of a baseline about, okay, well, where am I on these? And if I'm not at the optimum end of the scale, which most of us are not, what are some of the things that I can start to do that make sense to me and that work for my life that can just help me shift that dial a little bit? So I hope I've given you nothing else, it's some food for thought around how you can develop a better understanding of your own well-being and what some of the things that you can do to change it, to have a more positive impact on your own mental health. So here are some resources that I've shared for you. And one of the things, the third one down there, the SelfCare Planner, is a link to a really great a tool or a document that sits on the Black Dog Institute website. And on the previous slide when we were talking about self-care, this is actually a document that just helps you think about the different parts of your life, what you're doing well, and perhaps what are some of the things that you can do better or differently to look after yourself. So there's some really great resources on here. Those short videos and TED Talks are between 2 and 20 minutes, so they're really easy to fit in and to revisit and to share with your friends and family, because none of this is complicated, and most of it is within our gift. And if there's one thing that I encourage all of you to do for yourself, is to invest some time and energy in looking after yourself and thinking about where you can do more to help yourself and to improve your mental well-being, because if you can do that, the benefits will be huge. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rachel. So just a reminder to everyone, if you've got any questions, so we've reached that point, please send them through that question chat box. And also this slide, we'll be sending around a copy of this slide to everyone post the webinar, so tomorrow. So that way you're able to click on the resources. So you just won't be able to click on the resources through the current format. So we have got one question that's come through, Rachel, which came through earlier. This came from Louise. What other toxins apart from alcohol are common and should be avoided?
Thank you. That's a really great question, Louise. So, I mean, alcohol is the most common toxin that most of us have in our lives, but nicotine is another one, and the whole range really of illicit drugs, from cannabis through to the much kind of harder end of the spectrum. I think that there's a perception that because some things are either legal, like alcohol and nicotine, or considered to be more benign or friendly, like cannabis, that somehow they're less harmful. But actually, that the harm is much greater, because there are so many more people who are using alcohol. It's very freely available. I think most of us, if we don't enjoy a drink ourselves, we'll certainly have a wide circle of friends who do, whereas actually most of us don't know that many people who are users of much harder and more illegal drugs. So there's this perception that because something is legal, it can't do us harm, or it can't be as harmful, whereas actually the impact of continued alcohol use on our mental health, for example, is really significant. And I think we all will know, again, people in our circle who, when they've had a few drinks, really become quite an unpleasant person, and that's a very immediate impact of alcohol on the brain. But the longer term impacts can also really change people's behaviour. But cannabis is another really good example. I mean, I think it's a drug that's fairly widely used across a whole range of age groups as well. And again, there's this perception that it's not really very harmful, but actually continued use of cannabis has huge impacts on people's mental health. And certainly when I think about my experiences back in public mental health services, some of the most distressing drug-induced psychosis I ever saw were from young people, teenagers who had cannabis for the first or second time. So, as with all drugs, each of us individually will have a different predisposition or reaction to a particular kind of drug, in the same way that we all react differently to alcohol. Again, we all react differently to cannabis and to other drugs, but and we don't always know what the impact of those will be on our mental health, either in the short term or the longer term. So, I'm not a purist. I don't say don't ever have these things, because that's not realistic. But I think it's really important to be mindful that there are a lot of substances that we take into our bodies that are not helpful to our mental health.
Thanks, Rachel. So I've got a couple of questions that are all based around the same line. So I'm just going to group those together. Essentially, do you have any suggestions for helping others who you believe are experiencing mental health issues but aren't responding to you reaching out?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one, because quite often what can happen is that people who are experiencing mental health problems completely withdraw. So either they are in denial that there's anything wrong, or they're overwhelmed by their feelings and don't think that they will ever be able to be resolved, or they feel that they're a burden and they don't want to share how they're feeling with the people that they love, because they don't think they're worth it. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why people don't respond when you reach out. And I guess my advice there is to keep trying, is to gently keep reminding them that you are there for them, that you can see that things aren't right, that you want to help them, that you're not going to force them into doing anything they don't want to do. You're not going to make them talk. But it's just those ongoing reminders that I'm here for you. I'm willing to listen. It's confidential. It's private. You know, I'm not going to push you down a particular track. And to try and sometimes make those connections a bit more informal. So don't sit somebody down and say, let's have a conversation about your mental health, but take some more informal opportunities, a bit in the way that we might do when we're trying to, you know, deal with our teenagers, that if we sit them down and say, let's talk about this, they just zip up. But actually, some of the best conversations happen when you're driving somewhere in the car, or when you're out walking the dog, or you're having a moment, a spontaneous moment where there's just the two of you there, and you can quite often work a conversation round in quite a gentle or informal way. So I would say hang in there, keep trying, let them know that you love them and that you care about them, and use any informal opportunity to engage them in some conversation. Listen out for little cues. Quite often people will drop small cues that they're ready to talk to you, so just listen out for those and be ready to say, okay, this is my opening, I'm going to gently try again. And I guess the last thing I would say is that there are lots of training courses that you can do out there. Lifeline do a great one called Accidental Counsellor, but there's others as well where you can learn some of those skills around active listening and having difficult conversations with people, so that if you do get into those conversations with someone, you feel a bit more equipped to deal with it.
Thanks, Rachel. So another question here. For those who are beyond able to help themselves, what's the next best step for those that are supporting them?
I think everyone has to get to a point where they need to think, is it time for a more professional help? And certainly the first port of call would usually be a GP. So if you can encourage someone to go to their GP, either by offering to support them to get there, then a GP is a really good place to go. In an emergency, there are places like the emergency department. I mean, they're not great for someone who's in a mental health crisis, but the emergency department is a safe place, and it's somewhere where you can access support if you need to. But the frustrating situation that a lot of people find themselves in is that they can see that someone they love or care about is really not doing well at all. They are resistant to all efforts to help. And sometimes we have to say, there's nothing else that I can do right now. I've done everything that I can. I now have to wait for whatever comes next. It might be that things get worse. It might be that there's a crisis. But sometimes that's all that you can do, is to wait for that moment. So in that case, what you need to do is think about yourself. Okay, I'm here as a carer. I'm worried. I'm frustrated. I can't do anything. Where are the places that I can go to get some support for myself? So organisations like Lifeline, like Carers Australia, like SANE are all places where, sorry, my dog just barged in the room, are all places where you can go as a carer to talk to people about some of those exact struggles, about how difficult it is to look after or support someone who doesn't want help right there and then, because it's a very real situation that a lot of people find themselves in, and sometimes you can't do anything.
Thanks, Rachel. So another question here from Phil. Do you know if there's a self-care plan template that we could perhaps provide our staff, providing a neat summary of the factors for holistic or targeted action planning?
Well, the link on the resources, the self-care plan provided by the Black Dog Institute, is probably a really good place to start. So I would encourage you to follow that link, Phil, and have a look and see if it meets your needs. The Black Dog Institute have actually done a lot of work around workplace mental health and supporting people as a people manager who are experiencing mental health problems, and how you can help them put some plans in place to support them and work with them. So definitely have a look at the link that I've put on there, but also have a little browse around at some of the other things that the Black Dog Institute have got, because they have done a lot of work in this space.
Perfect, thank you. So a question from Sandy: How does someone who's struggling decide whether to call Lifeline or Beyond Blue?
That is a really good question, because I think probably for most of the general population, they think that the two services are interchangeable, and essentially they are. I mean, I guess the technical difference is that Beyond Blue as an organisation are very focused on supporting people through depression and anxiety and other mental health problems. So either people who've already had a diagnosis or feel that they are experiencing some symptoms of one of those disorders and are looking for where to go next for support. Lifeline is a very deliberately general in crisis organisation, so we put no parameters around why people can call us or what needs to be happening for them. So from our point of view, a crisis is however that is determined by you, and actually most people who call Lifeline are not calling us about a mental health problem, but they're calling us about the impact of some stressor in their lives, usually relationship problems. I would say that probably nearly 50% of all the calls that come to Lifeline are either directly or indirectly to do with the impact of a relationship, and that's, you know, the full spectrum from bullying, domestic violence, other abusive relationships, loneliness or the lack of a relationship. So generally the impact of all those things on you. So there are no boundaries really around why someone can call Lifeline. So that would be the difference. Beyond Blue tends to be a bit more specific support targeted around symptoms of depression, anxiety, other mental health disorders, and where to go next to get more help. Lifeline is much more generic. So if you think, oh, I feel terrible, but I don't really know what kind of help I need or what's causing me to feel this way, then a call to Lifeline will usually help you just navigate through a little bit around what's happening and just think about those next steps, make sense of what's happening right now, and think about what's going to be helpful in the hours and days afterwards.
No, thank you, Rachel. And one final question, which would pretty much wrap us up as well. Would toxic relationships be included in the list of toxins?
That is a really good question. I would still bracket those in the relationships sector. But I think, in a way, does it matter where you put them? If you know that a relationship is toxic and doing you harm, then the next step's really for you to think about how do you remove that relationship from your life, or lessen the impact of it if you can't remove it from your life. So I would say you could put it in whichever of those buckets you like, but the main thing is to acknowledge it and think about how you're going to deal with it.
Perfect. All right. Well, that is all the questions we have come through, and yeah, it's with 3 minutes to 1. I think it's a good time to wrap up. So thanks very much, Rachel, for presenting today and sharing your knowledge with us. It's greatly appreciated. And as I said to everyone, we'll send through a copy of that last slide with the recording as well tomorrow. Thank you very much, Rachel, for sharing that information with us.
Thanks for having me.
Hopefully, everyone's everyone tuning in today has taken a few things that you can take back to your workplaces, back to your family lives, and back to your personal lives. So hopefully you've enjoyed it. Just a reminder, I've mentioned it, that today's webinar has been recorded and it'll be available up in the member portal in the next 24 hours. We'll also send a link around to the non-members. So yeah, that's it for us today. As I said, we've got some webinars coming up with one in 2 weeks' time that we'll have the information for shortly. Thanks for joining us for the NSCA Foundation webinar series. Thank you for your continued support of the NSCA Foundation. If you're not a member, please consider it. More information will be in these follow-up emails and on the website. But thanks very much for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.